He walked away from his life and vanished for 18 years. One ordinary morning, a man walked out of his apartment and never came back. There was no argument, no dramatic goodbye, no final message. He simply closed the door behind him and stepped into a life where he no longer existed. For the next 18 years, the people who loved him believed he was gone forever. Some thought he was dead. Others believed he had been kidnapped or murdered. A few suspected he had chosen to disappear on purpose. All of them were wrong, and all of them were right. This is not a story about crime. This is a story about escape, about pressure, and about what happens when a person quietly decides that their own life has become unbearable. In the early 2000s, Andrew lived in a quiet European city, the kind of place where people recognized each other on the street but rarely asked personal questions. From the outside, his life looked stable, predictable, almost boring. He was in his mid-30s. He had a steady job that paid just enough to survive. He had a wife who trusted him, and he had a small daughter who still believed her father could do anything. There were no obvious signs of crisis, no financial collapse, no visible addiction, no criminal past. But stability can be deceptive, because sometimes the most dangerous pressure is the kind that builds silently. Andrew woke up every morning at the same time. He followed the same routine, the same streets, the same conversations, the same expectations. And slowly, without realizing it, he began to feel trapped inside a life that no longer felt like his own. People often assume that those who disappear do so suddenly, impulsively, that one bad day pushes them over the edge. In reality, disappearances like this are rarely spontaneous. They are usually the result of months or even years of internal conflict. Andrew felt invisible, not ignored, but unseen. His role in life had become fixed: husband, father, employee. There was nothing wrong with these roles, but there was no space left for anything else. Every decision he made was expected, every reaction predictable, every future already planned by someone else. And over time, that predictability began to feel suffocating. On the morning he disappeared, nothing unusual happened. He got dressed, he ate breakfast, he spoke to his wife calmly. He said he would be back soon. He was going to buy cigarettes. It was the kind of sentence no one remembers clearly afterward, because it carries no weight, no warning. When he stepped outside, he felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Not happiness, not excitement. Relief. At first, no one panicked. 10 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. By the evening, his phone was unreachable. The battery was dead, or the device was turned off. The next day, his wife contacted the police. They followed the standard procedure. They asked questions, they made notes, they filed a report. There was no evidence of violence, no witnesses, no unusual transactions. Andrew became a missing person. Search efforts began quickly. Volunteers walked through nearby areas, posters appeared on walls and lampposts, friends and coworkers were questioned. Nothing. No body, no personal items, no trail. As days turned into weeks, the initial urgency faded into uncertainty. The police considered several possibilities: an accident, a mental health episode, a voluntary disappearance. But without evidence, nothing could be confirmed. For Andrew's wife, time slowed down. Every sound outside the apartment felt like a possibility. Every unknown phone call triggered hope and fear at the same time. But weeks became months, months became years. Eventually, she was forced to make choices no one wants to face. Legal decisions, financial adjustments, emotional acceptance. Andrew was declared missing. Life moved forward, not because she wanted it to, but because it had no alternative. What no one knew was that Andrew was alive, and from the very first day, he was actively choosing not to be found. After leaving the apartment, he went to a train station. He bought a ticket with cash, then another one, then another. He avoided cameras when he could. He avoided conversations entirely. By the end of the first day, he was already far from the city he once called home. The early days were the hardest, not because of fear, but because of doubt. Every time Andrew stopped walking, questions returned. Should he go back? Could he still fix things? Was this a mistake? But every time he imagined returning, the pressure came back with it. The expectations, the roles, the identity he no longer recognized as his own. So he kept moving. Living without an identity is not romantic. It is exhausting. Andrew had no documents, no official name, no address. He survived by working temporary jobs, construction sites, manual labor, cash payments. He slept in cheap hostels, sometimes in shared rooms, sometimes wherever he could. Every interaction carried risk. One question too many could expose him, so he learned to stay quiet, to blend in, to exist without leaving traces. Years passed this way, and with time, something unexpected happened. The fear disappeared. Andrew stopped thinking of himself as someone who was hiding. He began to see himself as someone who had escaped. Without an identity, there were no expectations, no past, no future obligations. Each day existed on its own. For the first time in years, he felt free. But freedom has a cost, and that cost is loneliness. Andrew avoided relationships, avoided friendships, avoided any connection that might anchor him to another person's expectations. He lived among people, but never with them. Birthdays passed unnoticed. Holidays meant nothing. Time lost its structure. Meanwhile, his former life continued without him. His daughter grew up. She learned to speak, to read, to form memories without him. Andrew became a story rather than a presence, a photograph, a question with no answer. 18 years after he disappeared, something changed. Andrew received news that reached him despite all his efforts to remain detached. His mother had died. The message was brief, practical, final, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the past demanded attention. Grief has a way of breaking through even the strongest defenses, and Andrew realized something he had been avoiding. No matter how far he ran, some connections could not be erased. He decided to return, not to reclaim his old life, not to explain himself, but to say goodbye. When he arrived in his hometown, nothing felt familiar. The streets looked smaller, the buildings older. People walked past him without recognition. He had become invisible in the place where he once belonged. At the authorities, his return was met with confusion. Records showed that Andrew no longer existed. Officially, he had vanished. His fingerprints told a different story. Slowly, the truth became undeniable. The missing man had come back. Reconnecting with his family was not simple. There were no dramatic reunions, no emotional embraces, only distance, shock, and questions that had no easy answers. His daughter was now an adult. She had built a life without him. Meeting her felt like meeting a stranger who shared his face. Andrew did not try to justify his actions. There was no explanation that could undo the damage. He understood that disappearing had solved one problem while creating many others. Freedom had come at the cost of connection. This story raises uncomfortable questions. Can a person truly escape their life? Is it ever acceptable to choose freedom over responsibility? And at what point does self-preservation become abandonment? Andrew did not disappear because he hated his family. He disappeared because he did not know how to exist within the life he had built. Some people break loudly, others break quietly. Andrew chose silence, and silence, when stretched over 18 years, becomes a life of its own. In the end, this is not a story about disappearance. It is a story about pressure, about identity, and about the invisible weight of expectations. Because sometimes the most dangerous moment is not when everything falls apart. It is when everything looks perfectly fine.